All right, so I decided to make two different videos. So I'm going to give you some of my notes from chapter 1, chapter 2, and chapter 3. Because you've read these chapters and done some of the activities, I don't go over everything in here in a lecture sort of way. I want to add information. And if you have specific questions about any of the content from the chapter, please use office hours or post them in the discussion board area. So one of the things I wanted to point out is in chapter 1 about description, like how to describe things, because you need to describe several dimensions of the story that you're writing. So this is where we get the difference if you've ever been told to show versus tell. I struggled with that because I didn't always know how to do the showing. So this chapter gives us some tools and techniques that we can use to move from just telling people about something to showing them and helping them experience it along with the characters in the piece that you're writing. All right, so I know in one of my classes, we talked a bit about constraint-based writing. And this is a nice way, technique to get you thinking really more like critically and creatively about how to say something. So constraint means you have some rules in which you're working within. But for this, I wanted to talk about ethnography a little bit and how it's partnered with this thing called thick description. So if you click on, like I just did, you can see that it gives you this brief, explanation of what ethnography is, but then it tells us that this approach uses something called thick description to help us talk about. It says explore. So to help us see, realize, understand something about a place and its associated culture. And then thick description here, it is basically the deliberate choices we make in writing as we try to capture something complicated. But I'm going to argue here and say thick description can be used even if it's not something really huge and complex. And so under as we move through techniques, and I'm paying attention that I'm not talking about some of these other things like the description, figurative language, and imagery, because for the most part, people tend to get that. But so I'll add a little bit as I move through this chapter. So techniques, imagery, and experiential language. What I wanted to add about experiential language in this chapter really is experiential means to experience. So when you are thinking about trying to get your readers to see a particular scene or feel an emotion, you're looking at experiences. So how do we relate experiences in a way that invites people into our story, the story that you're writing? And I'm going to zip past here a little bit, the thick description, because there's another section in here that it talks about imagery inventory. And so for that idea of figurative language and experiential language, I just want to remind people that we have 5 senses. There are 5 senses: want, sight, sound, smell, touch, and taste. And so just with those 5 senses in mind, you can write for each of them. So you might think about how you could develop visual descriptive points in your story where it's appropriate by looking at the different senses and writing for them. So just thinking about imagery through the 5 senses gives you several ways to think about including description in your story. So that is one thing I wanted to add when it comes to thinking about description and imagery and figurative language. Now, the thick description, we have a really good example here. I just want to point out that one of the things that the text says is, like, after you look at these 2 examples, this first one is short. The second one is longer. And the second one is the thick description. So even though it is longer, it provides the reader with a more depth of what's happening in that particular scene. And so thick description, if you can think about, writing that is flat, just like two-dimensional, but if you walk into a space and then the story sort of goes around you, that's what thick description kind of does. It brings things to vivid sort of around the reader. So it kind of surrounds, and they can better see, hear, imagine what's going on in that particular scene. I also want to add here that thick description and just writing descriptively in general, this actually goes with one of the mini lessons that you have to look at, and that's the one about your writing habits. In your writing habits, it talks about filler language, and sometimes we use words that aren't really useful. So you want to shoot for like concrete words. By concrete, as I highlight here, and what they say about thick description here is you're looking for nouns and adjectives, things that have some tangible, concrete weight to them. So we think about the market is busy. What does busy look like, sound like, smell like, taste like? I don't know. And then if something is colorful, what are the nouns and adjectives that will reproduce that particular scene? So I wanted to add that. And then the other thing I just wanted to add in this chapter, like you're shooting for description, you have to use this. And that is this activity here about microethnography. So I just want to point out in this activity, or this activity that you can do, it has you go look at some other place. And so you're not part of it. In ethnography, you aren't part of it. You're trying to describe something else. But I want to point out that since you are writing about yourself, doing this activity to see something that you're not close to a part of, that gives you the objective position to actually describe it. And for this task, since you're writing about an experience in your life, you need to take this activity and think about your story. And how can you get this same kind of level of observation from your own story that you can then figure out how to weave into your personal descriptive essay. The last thing I want to talk about in this particular chapter, I'm just going to go back to the beginning here. Sorry if I'm making you dizzy, because what I have to add here really isn't in this chapter. So I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about looking at taking these techniques and activities. And one of the things you can also look for is just how sentences are arranged in something that you're reading. Short sentences tend to speed a story up. Sometimes we might read that as choppy. They may not be as descriptive, and sometimes longer sentences are descriptive. So just looking at a piece for, I'm gonna scroll down to one of the examples, just looking at reading something and thinking about what is it that you remember from it, and why do you think you remember those particular aspects of something that you read. So if I look at this example that we have from chapter 1, and you read through it, so what sentences pop out to you and why? And then look at, if it's a long sentences, what is it doing? What is the job that's happening in that long sentence? What is the job that's happening in a short sentence? In this paragraph, like these sentences, the long ones and short ones, how do they come together and what do they do? So one of the things you want to do is start taking the techniques and even your experiences from the practices and coming and looking at the examples and seeing how they work. What kinds of choices are the writers making in order to help you see the description in this piece? And so that is my spiel for chapter 1. So I'm going to just stop it here.